Welcome to Advanced TV Herstory. I'm your host, Cynthia Bemis Abrams. This is the place where we connect the dots of TV and feminism to American culture and politics. Welcome, TV Herstoryans. Today, we're talking with Lisa D'Appolito, who you might recognize from a conversation I had a couple months ago with Lisa and Mallory Lewis, as they were putting sort of the finishing touches and rolling out a tremendous documentary on the life of Shari Lewis called Shari and Lamb Chop. And really, there was so much I had left over that I wanted to ask Lisa that I said, hey, can we connect? Yes. So welcome, Lisa, back to Advanced TV Herstory.
Well, thank you, Cynthia, for having me back.
I have lots of questions, and so I'm just going to jump right into them. What we didn't have a chance to talk about was, what is the career that led you to documentary making? It seems to me that it's both the art form, the actual hands-on how to do it, but then there's also something in your soul that says that you need to capture these stories. So your work as a documentarian is sort of one thing, but where have you been elsewhere that led you to this?
Well, I started as an actress many years ago, and then I went into advertising producing, where I did a lot of videos for nonprofits. And I started working with Gilda's Club, which is a place for people with cancer in New York City. And every year I would do these fundraising videos for them. And people would talk about Gilda as if they knew her because she had wrote her book about It's Always Something. And, she dealt with cancer. So there was a big connection between the members of Gilda's Club and Gilda. And I thought, wow, this would make a good documentary. I didn't even really know what that meant.
You just thought, I can do this.
Yeah, but, coming from advertising, there was always a budget and a timeline. And then I realized with documentaries, wow, you have to get the money yourself. You have to do everything yourself. A lot of people who do their first documentaries have no idea the scope of what it takes to do your first film. But I think the first film for anybody is their most passionate film. It's the film that they just have to do no matter what. So that's kind of how I got into it. And then it just sort of continued.
I read the Gilda Radner book. It sat on my shelf for a long time. And as we were talking or emailing, I wasn't sure in watching Love Gilda that I was going to really start crying because it is just such an important part of my teenage years. I mean, she was just so incredibly clever and out there. And, that was growing up in the late 70s and 80s was the time where you sort of developed your personality based on what you saw, who was breaking the limits and who was just putting herself out there. And Gilda Radner must have resonated with the tail end baby boom and sort of Gen X audience. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So you went from acting to sort of being behind the camera and you've just developed your skills on the job. Did you have any mentors or cool opportunities?
Well, in my advertising job, I had a great creative director mentor, and I would interview, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of people for different projects, and I did a lot of videos with patients who were dealing with diseases and things like that. So I kind of learned on the job. And I think the acting skills really help too. Like being an actress is helps you kind of get into characters and have empathy for other people. So that I just really like talking to people and interviewing them and getting their story. That's always been something that I really like.
And are you a native New Yorker? You're in New York right now, right?
Yeah. I grew up in Greenwich Village.
As you were growing up, what were some of the TV series or TV moments that resonate with you that you even think about today as, wow, that was the time I saw myself, or that's what I wanted to do?
Maybe the movie actresses like Katharine Hepburn and Bette Davis and Vivian Leigh were sort of the influences for me because they were just amazing actresses. So that was kind of the dramatic actress was really sort of the things that I loved the most. As a kid, I don't know, I loved the Archies, the comic strip.
Oh, yeah.
Lost in Space, maybe Happy Days, shows like that. What was the vampire soap opera?
Dark Shadows.
Love Dark Shadows.
Wow.
One of my favorites.
Interesting selection, kind of veering a little bit into, fantasy or at least strong fiction. So
Yeah.
that's cool. And the Betty Davis and Vivian Lee sort of that they were the gold standard of golden Hollywood. And even when you think about the movie magazines, which is kind of where my head was for all of those years, and I was a Rona Barrett regular. I mean, I didn't get the paper subscription. I went and took my, $2.65 to the drugstore and got the latest copy.
Yeah.
And it was just sort of, in the pre-internet world and the pre-entertainment tonight, the TV show that would happen at 6:30 leading into prime time. They were the ones who were sort of above it all. And it's also fascinating to think of what they had to do in order to protect their privacy. But
Yeah.
anyway, that they held my attention through all those years as well. And Katharine Hepburn's a case study in brand management, I think.
And Audrey Hepburn, we have to add her to the list too.
Yes, we do. And the list just grows because I'm like, Vanessa Redgrave is pretty fascinating too. Her memoir was good. I am a connoisseur of memoirs to some degree. I have certainly read many hoping that it was going to be really a solid reveal. I want to read something that's authentic, and I'm right in the middle of Connie Chung right now, and she is authentic. She's fabulous.
I have to read that.
Vanessa Redgraves was good too. And then someone like Vivian Lee really never had the opportunity to write her own, which is kind of sad. Betty Davis's one of her early ones was good too. So enough about memoirs, I guess. So now that you have two significant documentaries under your belt, Love Gilda and Shari and Lamb Chop, what is it about that kind of storytelling, which is based on a lot of fact and based on footage available and letters and diaries? What is it that compels you or that is sort of feeding your fire to do another one?
Well, I have a third one too on Albert Pune, who's a cult director from the 80s. That's a shorter film. And Albert, I felt like Shari, Albert, and Gilda are kind of unsung heroes. You think you know them, but you don't because there's so much more to them. And they weren't masters at what they did just out of nothing. They were superior talents. And so I think to me, it's the unsung heroes. It's the people whose story should be told. And also, I'm attracted to people who touch your soul in some sort of sense. I think there's something about Gilda and there's something about Shari. And maybe Shari, it's through Lamb Chop, or maybe it's through Shari, but there's something special. And I think once you find subjects like that, you just want to know more about them and go into their lives. And then you get caught in this web of wanting to tell their story and the responsibility of telling their story too.
And in this day and age, with everybody having a video camera in their pocket, it is now assumed that all you have to do is be clever 3 times and you can become a viral influencer. And yet, really, some of the most profound influence generated by Gilda Radner, as your documentary depicts, Amy Poehler, I mean, was practically in tears, or maybe she was when you interviewed her. That was a lifetime of honing the shtick, and Joan Rivers as well. And Shari Lewis practicing and practicing. And even though you know how to juggle when you're 13 or something, you have to, if you're going to do it for the camera, hard work.
And also the love of what you're doing. Gilda loved comedy and she loved people and she loved audiences and she loved to make people laugh. It came from a place that she didn't want to be. It wasn't that she wanted to be famous. She just wanted to be with people and make them laugh. So there's sort of a different sort of personality.
And it's just occurring to me now that both women died relatively young and both of cancer, both of ovarian cancer. Did Shari die of ovarian cancer?
Cervical.
Okay.
There's more to that. I mean, there's more to that. That's a whole other subject. Having women's diseases that aren't noticed, that aren't that recognizable, I mean, with Gilda, it took her years to find out what was really wrong with her. By that time, it was pretty late. So there's stories in there too.
Women in healthcare. That's another topic entirely. So there you were doing some work with Gilda's place. And does that still exist or did that close?
It closed and it became something else. But there are still Gilda's clubs throughout the country. And there's a big one in Detroit. where Gilda's from. So that's going pretty strong.
Advanced TV historians, listen up. If you are younger than, say, 40, you maybe have never even heard of Gilda Radner. You've only seen clips of her and her work that, for the most part, is centered on Saturday Night Live. So here we are speaking with Lisa D'Appolito, who has done this incredible journey into Gilda's life and the fact that she won an Emmy and she won a Grammy and she won a Hollywood Walk of Fame and she's in Michigan's Hall of Fame. Why is this story important for a 30-year-old or a 25-year-old woman who is either interested in TV or just interested in accomplished women? What is it about Gilda that still needs to be told?
I guess there's a couple things about Gilda. She still continues to inspire young comedians. So her comedy holds up. Like a lot of comedians, their comedy doesn't hold up over the years, but Gilda's continues to inspire young comedians by watching her. And if you watch her, she's still funny. And she inspired so many people like Tina Fey and Amy Poehler and Maya Rudolph and Melissa McCarthy and Bill Hader and so many people. And now there's a new generation of those people have inspired other people. You know, Gilda's legacy lives on in the world of comedy. And then she was one of the first people to come forward with her cancer, at a time. And still, it's not easy for somebody who's famous to come forward about and be honest with that. Gilda's story is just a story of resilience, of somebody who always found the humor in the darkest of times. And I think that that's the overall message of Gilda's life, is to, even when things are really awful, to find the funny in it, to find the humanity.
And she actually says that. She had said that in an interview, right? That's early in the documentary that she kind of makes it clear why she continued to be probably even more visible once her cancer diagnosis was revealed.
Yeah.
That it became actually more of a 2 or 3 pronged mission to be out there. One of the persons you interviewed, I can't remember who, indicated or observed that when Gilda walked into a room, like the energy changed, the vibe changed, something changed.
It was Martin Short who said that. He had talked about the audition that Gilda did. As Michael, Gilda's brother, always says, every girl wanted to be Gilda's best friend and every boy wanted to be her boyfriend. There was just something about her.
Yeah. The ovarian cancer and the fact that she was diagnosed in the 80s, she talks about that in her book, the difficulty in getting the diagnosis. Did her brother, in his interview, was there anything that didn't get added into the documentary about that struggle when she just wasn't well and nobody knew the answer?
Well, I was really lucky is that Michael, Gilda's brother, gave me access to her diaries. And she wrote a lot about her cancer journey. And also in the film, there's an audio tape where she recorded it herself, about, I don't know if it's a pathetic moment, but her down moment. And I think that that was just so poignant. In terms of what was left out in the book, I mean, the film, there was so much comedy. There's just so much you can add to the film. I feel like I covered her personal life pretty well in the sense of what the material had and the people. It was just, there was more, there's some performances she did in Canada that I wish I had included. There's just things like, I mean, that's the same thing with the Shari film. I'm like, I wish I had Shari and the kangaroo puppet. I was like, those things that you always regret. But I think in terms of her journey, she was so honest. She wrote her book and her good friends were with her and supportive of her. And she had her brother. And so
that audio, that recording that she did in the later years of her life.
Yeah.
How many hours was that? I mean, was it like a whole shoebox full of cassette tapes?
It was a shoebox full of cassette tapes. The film is actually made up of audio from all different kinds of things. Unfortunately, the shoebox was very, very, the tapes were, many of them were corroded and many of them were, you couldn't really listen to them. They were in pretty bad shape. Now they can be restored. Like 5 years later, there's new technology. So she sat with somebody and she hired somebody when she was writing her book to tell her story. And then there's some times where she just recorded things by herself.
Wow.
It was a lot to go through. I guess that was a lot, but it was so interesting. The 5 years of SNL was a lot to go through too.
And before that, Second City. I mean, how difficult was it to be able to view some of the video that now is 40 years old, 50 years old.
Well, there's always things that you wish you could find, you know? We didn't have any actual video from Second City. We just had photos. So, there's things like that. I mean, I feel like I'm a detective. I get to sort of search, I go into people's like storage units and I go into archives and one thing leads to another.
Is there any particular surprise moment from your investigative work of what is available on Gilda and who had what that is a great story?
Well, in her book, she talked about her and Jean recording a video when she was in the hospital. And I was like, where is that? That must be somewhere. Gilda's best friend, Judy, she came in from Toronto to Detroit to Michael's house. And we took all hundreds of tapes, most of them like just personal tapes of back in the day when you would record your favorite show. And we went through boxes and boxes, and I was like, I wish we could find Gilda's cancer tape. And Judy, who's like funny, and Michael, who's funny, they're both like have a great sense of humor. She pulls up the VHS and it says Gilda's cancer tape. I didn't know what was in it. And then I got on the plane. I took it directly to a place to transfer it. And they're like, okay, you can leave it here. I was like, no, no, no. Can you do it now? And then I saw Gilda in the hospital and that she had created this whole little movie for herself. She had no hair and she's in her hospital gown. And it's still like, it's so heartwarming. And she had Sparkle, her dog there. Like it was those things that you find and you're like, just magical.
That's amazing.
Like in the Sherry movie, we found her assistant in all his storage unit and all his stuff. We found the last time that she was on her show singing to the crew and he did the behind. And when you see those things, they give you such an insight into the person that like any interview, anybody talking about somebody can never give you that insight until, the home movies and personal diaries and audio tapes. Those are like where you really get to know the person.
And you actually had to rely on a lot of consumer quality videotape from the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
And Gilda Radner, when they were assembled in a restaurant and she just sort of did she break out in song?
That was her best friend, Ellen Zweibel and Robin Zweibel. That was I think it was their engagement party. There's something really great there. There's Gilda, it's not in the film, but Gilda singing Bridge Over Troubled Water with Art Garfunkel. So
oh, wow.
Yeah, all this, and there's like a plant right in front of them. So like it's not as amazing as not as usable.
I feel at this point we need to put in a plug for the local video, wherever you live. There is a video converter service, and get those VHS tapes out of your parents' basement, get them out of damp environments, and get them into the hands of somebody who has one shot, as you were saying. Have you had experiences in either one of the films or the three films that you've worked on where you had something and it was poignant and it was too corroded to use?
Yeah, there's a story on Gilda. It was my favorite story, which was Gilda talking about going to camp and how she was a chubby kid. And every time she was in a play, she was always the maid. And she would go back to her bunk and she would eat like candy. It's just a really amazing story, but I should probably go back and see if I could fix it now, but it was unusable. But I used it for a long time in the film, and everyone kept saying, you have to cut that. And I was like, I don't want to, but so there was a lot of half of that collection is pretty bad.
From a professional standpoint, pretty much whenever you have a VHS, you don't even look at it first. You take it to get converted.
Yeah.
So you don't have a VHS player at home?
I did, but things get stuck. Like Sherry's archive, Mallory, her daughter, had like a truckload of stuff too, and we didn't know what was on it. So we went to a professional place. They played it for us because, I mean, if you remember, like VHSs, the tape would get stuck, and
if it's corroded, it could just break.
Yeah.
You got to interview and maybe even speak with Amy Poehler and Maya Rudolph, and obviously Maya Rudolph's life was impacted at a young age by her mother dying of cancer.
Yeah.
How did they feel about her passing at such a young age?
don't think that's anything we ever covered, really. I had Gilda's diaries of these great poems and things she wrote, and I never knew how they were going to fit into the film and how I could use it. So the first interview was with Amy Poehler, and I took out the diary, and she's like, "Is that Gilda's?" And it was just like magic with everybody. So I think for comedians who grew up watching her to be able to interact with her physical writings was so powerful. So I think we stayed on the positive.
I hate to digress on this, but it would be cool with all of that printed material to do what sort of was big on Instagram a year or two ago with famous people reading short passages
Yeah.
and then putting them out there as, little 40-second clips. That would be really powerful, I think.
Yeah, I think that's actually, I have a lot more readings. They were in the DVD, the Love Gilda DVD bonus material. But you're right, I could get other people to read her stuff. I was working on trying to adapt one of her short stories into a small film. So I was working on that. But it's hard because Gilda's humor, when you take a short story that somebody writes, the humor is in the writing.
I did not know that Love Gilda as a DVD is available, but you can get it at Target for $11.60. And you say that there are bonus.
Yeah, there's a lot of bonus materials in there.
Oh, and the Gilda live show is actually available on DVD still too.
Oh, the Gilda Live on Broadway is amazing.
So you indicated that sort of you got the impetus to do the Gilda Radner documentary from your work with people at Gilda's clubs. Were they helpful? How did you get to the point where you even knew she had a brother and you could contact him? And did people open doors for you?
Well, the first person that they connected me to was Alan Zweibel, who was Gilda's writing partner. That kind of opened the door. And then he introduced me to Michael. And then little by little, then I met Judy, who was Gilda's best friend, Lorraine Newman. So each person kind of led to somebody else. And people were very protective of Gilda. So, it wasn't like doors opened pretty easily. It took a while.
And Gene Wilder, having passed now, was he still alive when you were working on it?
Yeah, he was actually. And I was able to meet him. He was not in good health. He had some issues going on, his dementia, and I think his wife is pretty vocal about it. But I was able to spend the day with him. Like I was trying for a couple years, and then Karen, Gene's wife, invited me over to spend the day with Gene. So I was able to spend time with him and hear stories about Gilda, and that was really great. He was lovely. And it was just a magical day. There was a point at the end of the day, it was me and Gene and two dogs just sitting in the garden together. We weren't even saying anything, but it was pretty magical, and I was really lucky to meet him.
In life, you only have a few moments that you feel like time almost slows down because you know exactly how powerful it is and how no one is ever going to do this again. And yet, the gift that you gave him to spend a day thinking about a time in his life and a love in his life, and you gave him as much, I'm sure, as he gave you that day.
Yeah, it was really thanks to his wife Karen, who was very generous and, made it happen. So that was good.
She left archives and tapes and people had videotapes and then she published It's Always Something, and that came out about the time of her death, and that can pretty much be found in many libraries.
Mhm.
Why did she document herself so much in those later years?
Well, she loved writing. Part of being on SNL is, being part of the writing team. Not that she was a writer, but, she created a lot of the characters herself, or she created them with other partners. So she was always writing. And when she met Gene, she was less interested in being a performer and more interested in being a writer. So she wrote a lot. She wrote a screenplay, which I've been trying to also get interest in that. So there's a lot, Gilda left behind a lot of stuff and she wrote all the time. So I think it wasn't like some people want to do their memoir at the end of their life. I think it was an ongoing thing with her. She observed, like a lot of comedians, they observe life in a different way. And I think she loved to document and write it down.
As she became sick And that whole notion that one can heal through comedy and laughter, that was like the front page of People magazine, or, the front cover of People magazine.
Well, I think also what Gilda found is when she had cancer, she went to the wellness center, which became the cancer support community in California, and she found solace in other people going through what she was going through. So that was another message for her, is to sort of spread that information, is to find other people who are going through what you're going through, because your friends and family, though they love you, it's not their experience. I think that was a big thing, and I think that was a big impetus in writing the book and sharing her story, is that she wanted that information out there, which eventually became the start of Gilda's Club after she passed away.
The other part, though, that sort of made her every woman was that, as you said, every woman wanted to be her best friend and every man wanted her to be his girlfriend. The fact that she had a difficult adolescence and was willing to talk about it, that made her, at least in the 80s and the 90s, not everybody was talking about how people used to be mean to them or their pain.
Yeah, and she talked briefly in her book about her eating disorder, which had started when she was younger. So she was very revealing about her life.
So when you were handed the diary, her diaries and her papers and all of that physical stuff, did they entrust it to you to take it back to New York to work with it, or did you make photocopies or take pictures? How does that work?
Well, that was the last thing that, Michael entrusted me to take him back to New York. Nina, who was my assistant, transcribed everything. I took pictures of all the pages and then we transcribed everything. So that was sort of the process. So, in terms of what we used from the film, we had the transcriptions. There were a lot of transcriptions for this film because there was all the interviews I had shot, all the interviews that Gilda had done on TV, radio, wherever. It was transcriptions of all the audio tapes and transcriptions of all her diaries. So there was a lot of material. And so that's when you have an amazing editor like Anne Alvergue, who was my editor, how an editor really helps you get through all the stuff you have and all the pieces and helps you refine the story.
And then, as a result of all of those transcripts, you had parts of video or pictures or whatever where then the words slid across the screen.
Yeah. And there were in the diaries, there was no audio. So that we had to be a little creative in terms of how we would bring those lines in her diary to life. And then that's where my composer, Miriam Cutler, comes in, because there's some beautiful spots that there's just Gilda's diary and this emotional, beautiful music that it brings that to life. As you know, it takes a huge army to make an archival film. It's not an easy thing.
This next generation is incredibly talented, and they're the ones that are now going to become the archivists and keeping things safe. You were fortunate, I think, in the end, very fortunate that the people who were so protective of those assets of Gilda's recognized their value and ultimately trusted you. So, as you then put this documentary out to the film festivals and it's now available, what's some of the most memorable feedback you've received from people who viewed the film?
I guess the most one is probably the most famous one because Tina Fey introduced the film at the opening at the Tribeca Film Festival. And it was such an emotional introduction. She said that she viewed the film in parts because she didn't want it to end. So to me, I don't know, that meant so much.
Thank you to Jane Rosenthal, Robert De Niro, and Paul Weinstein for inviting me here tonight. I got to see an advance copy of Love Gilda this week, and I cannot tell you how much I enjoyed it. I didn't just watch Lisa's film, I wanted to crawl into it and live inside it, and I think you're going to feel that way too. Lisa has found so much wonderful footage and audio and photography, and I know Gilda's family were so helpful in that, that she has combed through it all so lovingly that the final experience feels like you're having an intimate, honest conversation with Gilda herself, which I think only a handful of people in this room know what that really was like. Gilda meant so much to the people who knew her, which you'll see in the film, but obviously she also meant so much to millions of other people who felt like they knew her from the TV. And we talk a lot right now about visibility and representation in movies and TV, which I do think is so important. And I can personally attest, and I feel comfortable speaking for Amy Poehler and Maya Rudolph and Rachel Dratch when I say that seeing Gilda as a kid and seeing her, and she was so lovely, but she was also so authentically herself and so regular in so many ways. And she was not a piece of casting. She was who she was on the TV. That we all saw that and said, I want to do that. And it's possible because I see her doing that. And that's just, an early example for me of how important representation is for everyone, every walk of life. Gilda was our equivalent of Michelle Obama. And that is why Lisa's film feels like a miracle to me. It felt like I was getting to spend time with someone that I never knew, that I very much would have wanted to spend time with. I watched the film on a link on my phone in 10 or 15-minute segments over the last couple days, just what every filmmaker wants to hear. During taxi rides and subway rides. Rebooting it at the stop where there was Wi-Fi. And I realized I was parceling it out because it was very emotional for me, not just because we all know how it ends, but because I didn't want it to end. I didn't want the film to end. And I think you will feel that way too. And I just want to thank Lisa for this film and congratulate her and thank you to these people.
And then on another side, I did show the film at Cancer Support Community in California. I showed it at Gilda's clubs. So seeing the members and their connection to Gilda was very, very emotional.
Mm.
And of course, we were, on another side, we were nominated for Emmys. So I got to go to it was a really amazing experience. I was very lucky, and Gilda's an amazing subject.
And am I correct that it was a CNN film too? What does that mean?
What happens is, money and raising money is the hardest thing for an independent filmmaker. So at one point, CNN came in with all the finishing money, which enabled us to do the editing. So if they didn't come in, I don't know where we'd be right now. And they were great because basically they were just very supportive. And they gave the money to the film, and they played it on January 1st, like a New Year's Day.
I remember.
Yeah, it was great. It was really, really good. But, it was a long road until we got there. It was a couple years of fundraisers, bingo parties, Indiegogo fundraisers, asking every one of my friends and family, like everyone begging them, saying, if you would buy me a drink, would you just use that money? Just put it towards my film. So, it was a journey up to that point.
I don't know that people quite understand how difficult it is as an independent, not that there are too many big documentary companies.
Yeah.
And there's no place like Lifetime Intimate Portraits, which was sort of the faster development of a documentary in the 90s and up to the early 2000s.
Yeah.
And at a time when, for the most part, there was no internet. So they had to hunt in different ways and grab interviews with whoever they could. It's a different place. It's a very different marketplace today. Yet, on the other hand, with streaming, Love Gilda and maybe someday Shari and Lamb Chop will be seen, on Hulu. As long as people are still watching, it will still be available, and it will take them to that special place. But that Tina Fey, wow, that must have been very powerful.
Yeah, it's on YouTube somewhere.
And so, were you in charge of inviting her?
No, the festival, it was New York, and Tina made sense, and I guess they had a connection, but it was pretty exciting to get her, I have to say, because she's one of my favorite. They're all my favorites. So I was really lucky. Everyone who's in the film, I love.
Yeah.
I love humor and I love their acting. So I was very lucky.
The impact of Saturday Night Live in those years was just phenomenal.
It's going to be a resurgence, though, because there's the Saturday night movie that's out, but it's going to come out digitally. It's the 50 years of SNL. this year. So I think there's a little bit of a resurgence.
And I have been noticing on Instagram that you have been putting up, or is it you or somebody else, but posting.
My son, he loves it. It's like he loves to keep Gilda's legacy alive.
That's true. I'm the one who's pressing like. So
Yeah, everyone out there, please press likes. It makes him happy.
that's what you have to do. And so on Instagram, it is Love Gilda the film.
Gilda the film.
The avatar is the Love Gilda image, and it's effective. It's just this reminder, and it gives, if you have seen the documentary on Hulu or some streaming service and you like it, and you can only encourage your friends so many times, but really everyone has a reach now on Instagram and can do something to continue sharing the good work of a documentary like Love Gilda.
Which is good. And Gilda's so positive. To me, Gilda, even though it's a sad story of what happened to her, there's still light and there's still humor. So she's such a positive person to get to know.
That was kind of the inspiring thing. She just demonstrated was it courage, or was it fearlessness, or was it some sense that she had given everything she had? She took every day and lived it to the fullest. There's a lot of good positive takeaway.
Yeah.
To wrap things up on that incredibly positive, Gilda would be proud of us note, you do have some projects in the works.
So I've just started filming a new documentary on Laura Nyro, who is a singer-songwriter. And I'm just on the Laura journey now. I don't know. It just happens. You find somebody who's so amazing and you just want to tell their story.
Well, we wish you all the best. On Instagram, then you have the Love Gilda account. Are you on any other social media or?
On Facebook, Love Gilda is pretty strong. There's like 150,000 fans there.
That's great. I appreciate your time today. And listeners, get out and watch Love Gilda if you haven't already. If you have and you want to post any feedback or any questions, I'd be happy to do follow-up, and we could put out a little short on YouTube or something and just bring your answers forward. So do send them to tvherstory.com. You can do the contact us or advancedtvherstory@gmail.com. Also find us now on Blue Sky and Instagram, and maybe not so much Facebook. Not spending as much time there. Listeners, Lisa's work, past, present, and future, that is why I podcast. In addition to Lisa D'Appolito, many thanks to Mary Lou Morose for her work editing this episode, as well as Nivea Lopez, who brings it all to life in visual that you'll find on YouTube. Find Advanced TV Herstory on YouTube and Spotify and Pandora and all the other places you find podcasts. Also go to tvherstory.com. You can see the entire archive right there. Also subscribe to our monthly newsletter. I promise your information will never be sold. Lastly, the music you hear is Jazzer's Take Me Higher, found at freemusicarchive.org. Thanks so much for listening. I'm your host, Cynthia Bemis Abrams.